Well, good morning and welcome, and thank you for being here. My name is Kristen, Forderer, and I have the pleasure of moderating today. I work for CGI, a global information technology consulting firm. I'm actually on, right now, the Enterprise Data to Revenue Project, or EDR, at the Franchise Tax Board. And it's hard. I was thinking this morning, gosh, I've already been there for 3.5 years. Time flies when you're having fun, right? People often say, what is it that you do for a living? And I really like to describe my background as the people side of implementation, right, of technology implementation. So I focus on business process reengineering and change management and training and areas like that. Prior to EDR, I actually spent 5 years on, I know that's a long time, 5 years on the California Child Support Automation System, or CSAS project. How many of you have heard of that? Yeah, yay. That was our big statewide implementation of a child support system. An amazing project and 5 years of an amazing experience, actually, and that's really why I'm super excited about our topic today, effective teaming between state and local governments. I think it's an important topic, and given where we live and the types of projects that we have here and our panelists, I think you guys will find it really interesting. So welcome, thank you for being here. You only have to listen to me for 10 minutes, so those of you that know me and the faces that I recognize in the audience are like, whew. So 10 minutes, because I just want to lay the foundation and set a little groundwork and talk about why we're here and why effective teaming is so important, and then I'll turn it over to the panelists, and that'll give you guys a chance to think of all the wonderful questions that you want to ask them to put them on the spot, right? So be thinking about it, jot them down so that you can ask them during our Q&A time, okay? So 10 minutes, and I'll just cover the first 2 bullets on here, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. So why are we here? We think about the nature of California and California projects, right? 1 in every 8 people in the United States lives in California. We have a population of over 38 million people, right? We're big. I'm from Texas, and they like to say you do things big in Texas. We do things big in California, right? We have 58 counties. We do our IT projects big, right? So when you talk about doing IT projects and you talk about projects that involve state and local governments with 58 counties, the coordination and the importance of that coordination is absolutely key, right? We all know that it's absolutely key. The expectations of both the state agencies and the expectations of the counties are something that has to be taken into consideration when you're planning, when you're designing, when you're implementing, and even after you've implemented. So one of the things, and I think this is self-explanatory and you guys all know this, but large-scale implementations, thoughtful, consistent, and focused coordination. And we'll spend some time talking about that and what that looks like and experiences with that throughout today. I like to think of it as all parties have to be marching to the beat of the same drum, right? We all have to be, from the state level, from the local level, everybody has to be marching towards the same objectives, and it's not always easy to get everybody on the same page. I liken it to, how many of you saw the Katy Perry halftime show, right? Imagine what it took to put that on. Although I did hear this morning somebody mention that there was a rogue shark on there that was dancing kind of crazy. I don't know if any of you saw that, but the amount of coordination it takes to put that on, right, and put something like that on, absolutely, it takes that level of coordination when you're talking about implementations like what we do here in California. We've got to all be marching to the beat of the same drum. Also, communication. Everybody always talks about communication. You'll hear me talk about communication all the time, but it's not just sharing information, right? It's how you're sharing the information, it's when you're sharing the information, it's who's sharing the information. There has to be a structured process and an organizational structure in place to support whatever communication you're doing. It's not just saying, oh yeah, we told them that. We told them that. There has to be a structured process in place that supports everything that you're doing, and we'll talk some about that too. I am a big believer in the importance of having a dedicated group of people to focus on implementation, right? People love to talk about system design and all the technical aspects, and I will stand up here and tell you one of the key aspects to make any project successful is the implementation work that you do, the business process reengineering, the change management, the focus on the end users, and making sure that they are ready and prepared. And I'll say that over and over and over again. So, and I've touched on some of this, but I want to cover a couple bullets before I turn it over to you guys. Why effective teaming is so important. So we want to get, and you know this, but we want to get all the right people in the room, right? If we can get state and county representatives in the room early on to help us design the solution, so get them in from day one, we're actually going to minimize the need for change down the road. And I don't just mean, hey, if we're doing a large-scale project like a CSAS, like the child support implementation, or the CMIPS project that has been done here in California for the in-home supportive services program, it's not just, hey, we got a representative from a county. We've got LA County to Imperial County to Modoc County. You need representatives from the large, from the medium, from the small counties. You need representatives from the counties that do their casework from cradle to grave, meaning one worker handles everything, to functionally organized counties. You need everybody to feel like they have a stake in the game and be involved from day one in the design. I think there's something to be said about giving people the opportunity to experience the sense of ownership that comes with being involved from day one. Right? This is our system. I helped design this system. So to the extent that you can get more folks involved early on, you'll create more of that sense of ownership. And that helps with the next point on here, which is user acceptance. You can't force people to accept change, right? I can't force my daughter to eat the beautiful dinner I put on the table every night. It's not a beautiful dinner, but we can't force people to accept change, right? We can't force them to accept what's right in front of them. We can build an amazing system with all kinds of bells and whistles, but we can't make people use it if they don't understand how it impacts their day-to-day work. Hence the importance of the implementation work that we do. So things like change management, creating awareness of why you need to be changing, creating knowledge about what the change is ultimately going to mean for you, business process reengineering and helping people understand this is what's going to change about your day-to-day work when this new technology comes into play. People understand that type of thing, they're more likely to accept it. And speaking of business process reengineering, one of the things, and we touch on it in the bullets up here, you have that fine balance between when you've got a big implementation that involves state and county, balancing between statewide standardization of business processes, which is awesome, right, when you can do standardization. It's amazing when you can standardize. But you also have to remain flexible enough and design automation that's flexible enough to meet the needs of an LA and an Imperial and everywhere else in between, right? You gotta design, or you gotta at least take that into consideration and set the stage up front and early on for what is and isn't acceptable as far as uniqueness, right? The significance, and I touched on communication a few minutes ago, but the significance of effective and two-way communication, I'll tell you, based on my experience at CSAS, one of the things that was most effective about that project was for those of us that actually went out in the counties, we were as transparent as we could be about what was going on, right? We told them, here's the stuff that's working really well, here's where we're having struggles, so that they knew and could collaborate with us to make sure that we made the rollout as smooth as possible. So be transparent and let them also voice concerns back if they have them, or voice opinions on things. So the more we listened and heard, the more we understood their business, and the more we could be transparent from our perspective as well. So it's the back and forth of the two-way communication. And I'm proud to say I got to be in one of the pilot counties for CSAS, and we gave them as much extra love and attention as we could on that project. And that's important because they were setting the stage for every county that came after, right? Hopefully, our goal was to work through any kinks and bumps along the way so that the rollout was all that much easier for everybody that came after the pilot counties. And in all honesty, a lot of us, they became kind of like family. And we do a lot of keeping up with those folks still because you truly become one integrated team when you work that way. So paying extra special attention to the pilot counties and those folks that are willing to step up and go first was a really important part of our rollout. And of course, having a structured implementation approach. We had on the project team, an implementation team that the counties and the state mirrored so that we had partners and we really could collaborate very effectively by having partners on the project and partners out in the counties and partnerships with the state as well. So those are all things that from my perspective were extremely important. And I'm almost done. Decision making. One of the things, I have a hard time deciding, where I'm gonna stop for coffee in the morning some days. So when you talk about a project like CSAS or a lot of these other big statewide implementation projects, imagine the challenges that you go through getting people to make decisions and figuring out the right group of people to be making those decisions. So having a solid decision-making process, and I know you guys will touch on that too, is absolutely essential so that people understand how decisions are being made, who the decision makers are, and involving as many people as possible in that decision-making process so that people feel heard, but it doesn't look like there's a whole overhead layer involved in all that. Does that make sense to everybody? Sounds about right, huh? So I want to introduce my brother David and my other brother David. We have pictures up here so that nobody gets confused about who's who, right? They're going to talk a little bit more. David Maxwell-Jolly is the former director of the State of California Department of Child Support Services. And then we also have David Kilgore. It worked out perfectly. So if you guys say David, somebody's bound to answer. And David Kilgore, the Chief Deputy Director from Los Angeles County Child Support Services. And they're both going to share some of their insights with us on a couple of topics, some challenges for state and local partnerships, as well as some keys for success in making those work. So I will turn it over to you guys now.
Great.
All right.
Do we need to?
No, you can talk in those, I think, unless you want.
Are you recording? Because it's not that big a room. So
Yeah.
if we get up.
Oh,
and
do you
wander-
need them to be on the microphone?
All right. We'll stay on the mics then. They said if possible.
Unless you yell as loud as I do.
All right. You want to start or?
Okay. What we kind of structured this in talking about the challenges and then some other things you can do about it. Actually, I do want to stand up because I can see you all a lot better. So let's just march through these bullet points and talk a little bit about some examples. David, you want to take the first one here?
Sure. There's often this perception of misalignment between what the state's trying to do and what the locals are trying to do. And I think this kind of played in pretty early on in the project. The state of California was under federal requirement to implement this system, and the state was getting penalized every year for not having that done. So there were a set of requirements that the state had to meet to deliver a successful system that the feds would buy off on. The local agencies really didn't care about that. We needed a system that we could manage the casework that was being done on a day-to-day basis. And most of the time, those two lined up. But then there were certainly instances where the state had to cut off working on particular things that were not essential for the requirements so that they could focus more time on the things that were. And those things that were dropped sometimes were very important to the locals, and that's where we started to find some misalignment happening.
I'd add, in my years there, was a lot of times dealing with the programmatic side. And programmatic misalignment of objectives can be very problematic when you step back to the running of the child support department locally as opposed to running of the State Department of Child Support. For example, we had to deal with, at the time in the middle of the child support development process, we had to deal with arbitrary budget cuts. Sometimes the objective at the state level is to slice, $20 million out of the child support department's budget. That has nothing to do with local objectives and probably is contrary to local objectives. At the same time, I find counties have another set of objectives. County departments and county structures will have a different set of objectives. For example, preserving employment. I spoke to local child support directors who were proud that we've never laid off anybody from our department. And that was one of their main objectives, is to make sure that they wouldn't ever have to lay anybody off. Sometimes those local objectives, you need to understand those local objectives because you're going to have to function in those and you're going to have to try to adapt to them. It really gets to the second point, which is independent sources of authority. At the state, I was appointed by the governor. I reported to a secretary of Health and Human Services. We were given authority to organize a statewide system. At the county level, local child support directors were hired and fired by local boards of supervisors, and they got their local budgets really managed by those local. We set the budget at the state level, but the terms about how that money got spent was set by local environments, right. Pay cuts, civil service structure. And so we're each kind of dealing with our own environments and trying to have to plan and operate and move toward this statewide system in the context of those separate things. It gets to those chain of command issue. As I said, I'm reporting to the secretary on down. David, you report to
the board of supervisors, right? That's the key. And I report to the director, but the director reports to the board, and we get most of our initiatives and directions from the board. And they're often coming to us and saying, child support's going to work with the welfare department and the foster care department and the return to work group, and you're going to collaborate in those types of activities, which really doesn't necessarily fall into the straight scope of what the state is expecting us to deliver from a child support initiative in the organization. organization. So we get kind of two sides of directions on where we're supposed to go as an agency.
At the state level, the child support system development included participation by the courts. It included participation by the state controller, by the state treasurer. So even beyond the chains of command that led through the governor, we also had to get agreement and cooperation and actually resource expenditures out of a bunch of other constitutional officers that had their own problems and their own issues and their own reasons to cooperate or not cooperate. Oversight, we had to worry about Department of Finance, several generations of what is now the Office of Technology, Tyru, Guru, Huru, I forget what exactly their names were over the years, but the Technology Oversight Agency. And then we had to worry about Sacramento Press and about in some cases, the national press. You guys.
We had local commissions, child support commissions that would come in and critique our work and business products every day. We've got the Board of Supervisors coming in, and then all of the fatherhood groups that would engage us about the types of services that they were expecting that our fathers and mothers, those different groups would have. So we kind of got a different look from people coming at us with their expectations as opposed to what the state was dealing with on their side.
Now, in any kind of project, in any kind of political organism, there's this chain of command, and there's, make a decision, it gets appealed to the next level, and maybe it gets overturned. But all of these systems have outside of chain of command appeal processes. And in the old child support world, it was the district attorneys who ran the child support departments locally, and they were champions of going outside the chain of command. I mean, if they didn't like what there wasn't a director of child support at the time, the director of social services, didn't like what the director of social services said at the time, they just go to the governor. They're the local DA. They can call up the governor and say, do you know what's going on down here? This is not going to work for me. And being a political animal, the governor's going to listen to that. And he might call up his director of social services and say, what the hell are you doing down there? Stop that. Even in the context of not a DA, local child support directors know boards of supervisor members, they know local assembly members, they go to the legislature, they go to other points of authority in our complicated democracy and figure out ways to get appeal of decisions that they don't like. So that's why it's very, very important to try to make sure that there's a dialogue going on so that people understand at least the rationale for it, and that you can make the case to the guy who comes to you and said, people are complaining about you, to say, no, they're complaining to me, and we dealt with it, and we talked to them, and this is what we said. And
I would say sometimes it isn't even the director of the local agency that's kicking that off. A lot of times it is the union that has those employees that doesn't like the way the system or something's happening, and so the union takes that up and makes a big deal about it up at the state level, and suddenly that wraps back around and falls in the lap of the state.
Now the next point's your opportunity to say that you know how to run the business and we don't.
That's right. That's correct. Absolutely. And I've got 3 counties to back it up because I've been in 3 different counties. So I've seen it multiple different ways with different sized counties. And I think there is definitely this expectation or this belief, and not necessarily always justified. I'll be the first to admit it's not always justified at the local level, that we do know on the ground what it takes to deliver the services that are happening to the constituents. And we don't necessarily always believe that that's being taken into consideration up at the state level when they're making decisions about what's going to happen in the child support program. Sometimes those decisions are made, and then when it rolls down to us, we have to figure out how to implement that, and the resources become exponential. There was no money attached to the decision. It was just, this is the way you're going to do business now. And that causes a lot of problems when we're trying to fit that into the local county dynamic, 58 local county dynamics that all want to do something different.
The great example of that is date of receipt.
Right.
This was a CSAS drama. In child support, there are 2 ways you can account for a payment from an employer. You can account for it when the money was actually taken out of the payroll and the paycheck. And so when is the paycheck cut, and when is that child support money deducted? And that's the date, on the 15th of the month or the 30th of the month, whatever. Well, in the great wisdom of the state, what we decided to do was change that to the other option, which was date of receipt, which is I don't care when you cut the check to us, employer. What we care about is when the cash is in hand for us. Now, it makes good certain business logic. Turns out it created a change that was quite devastating and fundamental and affected all of our constituents, all of the cases, particularly the welfare cases. And I think if we had had a better understanding of business at the state level, we probably wouldn't have been taking on that.
So a
that
bigger
change.
example of this is someone comes into us on the 25th and makes their payment in our local child support offices. Past practice would say we would be applying it in that particular month. In this new dynamic, that would be sent up to the SDU, and it wasn't until the SDU got it and applied it to the case that would take effect. Well, that might be the next month. Now this person's accrued interest on that month because they didn't get it paid in the right month that they were supposed to have it, and now we have this angry non-custodial parent coming to us with this frustration. So a lot of the impetus on our part was, how do we get this message out? It says, you got to get this paid by the 20th, otherwise you're going to cause yourself some financial burden. And that was a big influx of frustration from our participants' perspective, something we could have probably brought up, as we would say at the local level. If you'd asked us, we'd have told you, kind of thing. And sometimes that happened and sometimes it didn't. And you don't necessarily know the impact of that decision when you're making it. You think it's just harmless and it's small, and this makes the most sense. It's logical. You officially start the date when it goes to the SDU, but the implications of that are much larger sometimes.
Yeah. You want to talk about lack of confidence in the state's ability to reform?
I think the lack of confidence in child support program has a lot to do with the newness of the program. It was only came into being in 2001 for most of us, and so there wasn't a good track history of successes for child support. It had its problems under the DA. In LA County, it was front times news and caused us tons of problems. I wasn't there at the time, by the way. But child support also tried to implement a system in the past and failed at this statewide system, and that failure kind of had everyone at the local level suspecting, well, can this really be pulled off at the state? Do they really have the skills and expertise? Have they really made all the contacts that's going to make this successful on the interim? Because it hasn't been successful in the past. And some of us local agencies like LA and some of the others that actually ran their own system said, we've done this. We actually know how to do this. Why are you going and trying to build this from the ground up when we've got something over here that's been working? Why don't you just take this and enhance it? There were a lot of discussions about that going on, that saying you're going to throw our entire world up when there are some possibilities that you could just build upon, and those weren't always taken into account.
From the state's point of view, and from my personal point of view, lack of confidence in the state's ability to deliver a system was completely logical and sensible. This was, there wasn't any way around it. We had to admit that we'd screwed up before, and we'd screwed up other projects. We screwed up child support projects. That doesn't mean we can't do it now. In fact, that's every reason why. In fact, we had a whole bunch of people on the team who had been around when the screw up happened before and were hell-bent to make sure it didn't happen again. And so we had an actually more dedicated crew, I think, than you possibly could have had. You want to talk about local control? You mentioned a little bit about that, the history in child support.
Yeah, I think the local control is a big deal. Child support is a fairly unique organization. It's state-run, locally administered. I'm not sure the boards of supervisors really wanted it in the first place, but it got thrust upon them. So they said, fine, it's federally and state-funded, but we're not putting any money into it. So at the local level, they really didn't want to support it, but they really didn't want to give away the control of it either. These are county employees. It's county's responsibility to carry out child support. It's been thrust upon them. And so now you got the state coming in and saying, no, we actually want to pull some of this responsibility back. In instances like Los Angeles County, where we had our own child support system, 125 plus people were in IT working on this system. You're going to take it over. What are we going to do with all these people? They got to go somewhere. The boards were really upset about those types of dynamics. We picked up Orange County and San Diego, so we had 3 pretty large counties on our system. And just knowing that this responsibility was going to go away, our ability to instantly try, and not instantly because nothing's in LA's instant, but the speed at which we were able to implement was faster than the states, I'll say that, on the system. So we had some immediate control over what we wanted the system to do and what we were going to automate and what we weren't, and how we were going to coordinate with the courts and what we weren't, and all of these different things, decisions that were being made at the local level that were going to be assumed by the state.
I can remember meeting with the CIO of LA County pre-implementation, talking to him about change management for his department and his data centers, and given the fact that a big chunk of money operating his data operation was going to disappear in the coming years, that was it was a fun meeting. There's another side of that, though, and I think the governors are probably one of the strongest articulators of that, is this idea of there is value in local control. There is value in programs being operated with a lot of discretion at a local level, because we do have a state that varies from county to county, state to, there are cultural differences, there are historical differences, there are different ways that counties operate. Some of it due to scale, some of it just geography, whatever. And that there is value in having the local counties have a strong say in how they do their operation.
We still kind of deal with this issue even today, 5-6 years after the conversion, where we go into the courts and the courts say, well, I want a 3-page income and expense declaration. And we say, well, the system generates a 1-page. And the courts say, I really don't care what your system says. I'm the commissioner and I want 3 pages. So then we as LA say, well, we do this in an automated fashion. The automated fashion can't work. Now we have to manually print out every single summons and complaint and send them over in paper, and then they have to deal with the paper and come back. And that lack of control, a lack of ability to be flexible to the commissioners' needs really hurts in a statewide system, and not being able to make a decision like that. And when we tell the commissioners, well, we can make this change in CSE, it'll take 3 to 6 months on the near side, they look at us and say, seriously? You'll start next week because that's what I want, and I'm going to reject everything until you do, and suddenly we're caught in between.
Yeah, right. Need for timely decisions, if you guys are all involved in projects, I don't have to sell you on the idea that decisions have to happen, and time is money, and too often we end up slowing things down because we can't get a decision out of things. 58 counties, lots of input, lots of discussion, lots of debate. Disagreements don't lead to timely decision making, and it can be one of the major drags on the development of a project.
And I think this is exactly where the state is able to step up and really be the person that makes the decision, because anytime the 58 counties are left to make a decision and LA County only has 1 vote, and we say, really, we're 1 vote out of 58 and you're going to make a decision based off of the majority, well, we turn into the minority, and that doesn't work for us. And the best of what the system could do suddenly gets kind of muddied up by this voting democracy type system, and at some point the state has to come in. Some winners, some losers are going to come out of this, but a decision has to be made, and they start moving forward, and everyone's got to live with it.
Credit for success and blame for failure. This is the dichotomy that is faced by each of the individual local leaders. It's actually faced by more than that. There was one of our main control agencies during the last moments of leading up to the go, no-go decision for CSAS was got the directions from its leadership to say, you can approach this project in 2 ways. You can say, you can be one of the people who made it work, or you can be the person who had all the right reasons to say, I told you so, after it fails. And that's kind of the choice that you face. You want to be on the bus, you want to be off the bus. Another way of saying is that we all have to hang together, otherwise we will certainly all hang separately. It's a choice that everybody has to make on a local level and at the state level. And it's a choice that if you have good state leadership, you actually confront people with in a very direct way. Are you on the bus here? Are you going to make this work for us? Because we need you to do it, and we can do this, and you really have to rope people in to get that to happen.
I think the blame for failure is kind of tough at the local level. If you have a state-run system and you're implementing this and something goes wrong, EPC cards goes out the wrong addresses, or something happens, the participants do not go to the state when they're frustrated. They come to the local agency when they're frustrated. You sent my EPC card to the wrong place, and we're like, that was not us. But we can't necessarily say, well, that was the state, because the participants really don't care about that either. They say, you need to fix this right now. And so you kind of have to just own that and work with the state to find the solutions. And either they're working with you or not, and that's either a successful communication or partnership or not. But there's no ability to really push off the blame either up or down when these participants come to you, because they're not interested in why the error happened or what happened. They're just interested in the solution that's being brought forward.
We're getting to
You're
about
watching
10
our
o'clock
time.
now.
Yep.
We need to
Okay.
move on through here. You want to take, I think we had you down for, want to talk about the local participants?
The local participants, I think, was a big deal, and there were some directors across the state that I think really got this and really understood that they needed to be actively involved and participating in all the decision making and all the discussions, and there were others that really didn't. And I think we'll talk about that in a little bit more in the successes, but there are definitely there's definitely a need for the local participants to jump in and be intimately involved in all the decision making. I think there were opportunities in the design of the system that the states just weren't looking at and weren't paying attention to, and could have had input if they were there at the table and really paying attention to speak up when the opportunity was there. Instead, it was missed, and then when things were being implemented and it wasn't going right, the state would say, well, you had your opportunity, but you didn't take it, and now you're complaining over here, and there's a lot of frustration that starts to build up because of that. Typically, there is the opportunity to present that, but you have to be willing and ready to step up and really spend the time to learn this stuff that might be out of your comfort zone.
Do you want to move on to keys for success? Sure. Got sort of three areas: governance, communication, and
Implementation.
You've got to align the objectives, at least in some way. There are going to be all these disparate objectives, but in CSAS we had the beauty of penalties. The program was going to put out $200 million a year, until the cows came in, unless we succeeded in getting this thing going. It focused the attention. At one year, fiscal year, the counties actually had to pay a portion of the penalties.
And we got more on board.
Yeah. And it made clear what our objective was, and it was a shared objective. But that shared objective and alignment is really something you got to nurture all the way through. On the other hand, the buck has to stop somewhere. And I think, David, you said it. At some point somebody's got to be responsible for making a decision. It can't be all committees. And having the state being responsible for the overall program performance, making that decision has logic to it.
And with 58 counties of such disparate sizes, and not everybody's needs are going to be met perfectly. At some point, you're going to have to take some losses in some areas and make some changes and just march forward with the best decision possible.
Clear structure and in project management. With such a large thing, you've got to have it clear to people how decisions get made and how things are being managed and what's the right venue to present your issues, risks, your problems, your design flaw problems. There's a rule that I have in my mind. It said any available venue. If there's a problem that people have, they'll try to find any available venue, and they'll bring it up in every single one, and hoping somewhere it gets stuck and people start hearing about it. That's a real drag on project processes. And what you got to do is you got to be able to let people know so that they know the right place to go. And that means that place has to be responsive to those things. But it also means you're not doing double duty and you're having the same problem being addressed 5 different people by 5 different committees and maybe coming up with 5 different solutions.
Right.
You want to go on the next one?
Yeah, so in communication, I think this was we had the most need for gain or improvement throughout the course of the project. Most of the directors put out their implementation teams and then kind of said, okay, you guys march forward, and didn't give it quite the time and attention that they might have until midway through the project when things started to look a little shaky and people were starting to get concerned about the decisions, and they started running to people and saying, well, why didn't you tell me about this? What's going on? That I didn't get anything from the state. I wasn't participating in those meetings even if I was asked, and suddenly that communication was breaking down. And I think it was at the point where they said, all right, all the directors have to come together, and we're going to make this a routine communication method to bring the directors fully up to speed, that things started to get a little bit better on the communication. And ultimately, that was, I think, what really helped keep this thing moving forward.
Yeah, I think the key for project leadership at the state level is to make sure that you are in close touch with the local leadership, in a close personal touch, so that they know your phone number, you know theirs, you talk to them. If they got a problem and an issue, they know to talk to you about it directly, and you figure out the right ways to solve it. That's the only way to really ultimately keep everybody together on the same team and marching down the road in a coordinated way. Sometimes you have to say, you have a problem there, it's a big problem, but it's not the top of the list today. It's down on later, and we'll deal with that later, but right now we've got to deal with these problems. And you have to be able to, at the state level, to be able to do that prioritization. That formal communications have to be timely and substantive. I have the same level of frustration, and had the same level of frustration that any local leader has, by a state representative coming in and talking a bunch of, well, we'll have to get back to you on that, or no, it hasn't been determined, and a lot of sort of dancing around the question and the issue. One of the things we tried to do when I was running the department at Child Support was to give as direct answer as possible, to really answer the question. Now that's kind of hard sometimes for a state bureaucrat to do, and sometimes I had to force myself to do it even though I didn't want to. But it's really very important to maintain the control, the confidence of local leadership, to really be given straight, direct answers as much as you can.
I think the last piece on communication I would identify as the local experts. Our local experts were experts in child support. They were not experts in business process reengineering or IT systems and things like that. And I know when they were walking into some of these meetings, if they didn't have a strong enough sense about the IT side of the house, they were hesitant to speak up, and they were hesitant to share their ideas and their suggestions. And particularly in the counties that didn't necessarily deal with their systems full time, they were not speaking up when they could have, and to emphasize or re-emphasize constantly that they need to be voicing their suggestions and their concerns, and allow some of the folks that can kind of speak both of those languages to translate that in and get the word across. Because a lot of times we would also be talking, but it wasn't translating very well to the IT folks because they didn't really know the child support side of the house. So finding those areas where you can bridge that gap between the strong child support knowledge and the strong IT knowledge, and find those folks in the middle, those are the biggest advocates for carrying out this type of implementation.
And think about on-site support from the local agencies as a communication mechanism, right? Have local people, local business people do some of your testing, so that they're there and they see it and they go back and report, well, I was there, yeah, it's rigorous testing, they're really catching the flaws, it's really doing it. Or, if your testing isn't up to par, you'll hear about it. Secondly, we had some local people who had good experience in the business side of large-scale IT operations resident at the state agency. So monitoring what's going on and having direct access to the state executives, so that you as a state executive or a project leader got the report from the person who was there on behalf of the counties, seeing flaws, seeing issues, seeing problems, and getting it to you right away. Again, sometimes there are problems you know about and can't deal with. Sometimes there are things you have to do and really need to get on right away.
Those experts on the system that came down and worked hand in hand on site with our staff at Conversion were invaluable. Could not have been done without those folks. They knew the system inside and out. They were brainstorming and troubleshooting issues that were happening every day. It was immediately apparent to us that all the training that we had done beforehand and that we had prepared for afterhand was inadequate. We were not focusing on the right types of things, and it just was not enough. If those experts weren't there, we would have drowned immediately on the system. We had them in every one of our offices. They had experience of all the other counties that came on. LA was last. We were all crossing our fingers. Is this thing going to work or break when we come on? And that first day when people are on, everyone's freaked out. They don't know what to do, and we have to kind of sit down and say, look, You know child support. You know what's supposed to happen on this case. You know what's supposed to happen on this system. Now you just need someone to kind of walk you through the new mechanism for delivering that. It's like they forgot child support altogether. The deer in the headlights. They couldn't move. They had no idea what to do next. And those on-site folks really calmed everyone down and kept things moving forward.
Yeah. I think we've gotten through a lot of the points that we wanted to make. Yeah,
questions?
Total shotgun.
We'll open it up to you guys. If anybody has any questions, we have about 5 minutes left, I think. So now's your opportunity. Yep, 5 minutes as he holds up the sign. We're perfect. Questions, anybody? One thing I know that I'm interested in to get you guys starting to think is, what did you guys find, both at the state and the local level, as being one of the most effective ways from a communication standpoint to share information with your staff, or from a state sharing it to the local level, or at the local level sharing it with your staff?
I still can hear the little ditty that the conference call program plays while you're waiting for other people to come on. We probably burned 70 billion hours of person time on conference calls. In some of the cases, it included all of the key decision makers in the counties. In some cases, it was, the set of counties that were rolling out that time, and we were going over an implementation. There's no excuse at this day and age for not having structured conference call effort, in regular periods during the development, during planning, during the build, during testing, and during rollout, to make sure that you have an opportunity to people raise their hand. Now that's an issue. We had one with the directors, child support directors, and that became one of those any available venues. And what you've got to do as you're running a project is you've got to staff that
To answer the question.
input point, so that you actually record the stuff, so that you track it, and somebody pays attention to whether or not stuff is getting knocked off the list, or at least they're getting prioritized, so you're attacking the important things first. But you've got to have those structured venues open on a regular basis, periodic basis, so people know how to get their issues on the table.
And the best communication mechanism for me was after we implemented those daily calls at the end of the day, where everybody would report in what's working, what's not. We'd try and find solutions the next day, and people would keep reporting in every single day what was problematic, and we were able to kind of march through those daily. And then once daily became, we didn't have any new items coming, we'd move it to weekly, and then finally monthly, and it dissipated away. But those daily calls, check-ins to say what's happening, what's broken, what's not printing, and what's not functioning, those were key communication points that kept our entire departments moving together.
Anybody else?
I'm not too familiar with the program, but I'm wondering how you held the counties accountable for the process measures to keep it on track, and how did you leverage that buy-in, or was that contractually from the governor top down, or did you just go out and talk to people?
I think that was sheer persuasion in part. It was giving locals a little bit of piece of that the cost that the state was charging, but there was a very strict time frame for every county to convert.
Are you talking about their participation in the project, execution of the project, or are you talking about programmatically?
Both.
Okay. Well, in terms of execution of the project, I think that there was, with a lot of grumbling accompanying it, there was fundamental buy-in to the idea that we're going to have to do a statewide system. And, it took a while to actually focus people and get people to accept that, I think, broadly. But once we got to that point, we actually got good cooperation. There was concern, actually, early on in the project that at some point LA would say, we don't want to do this anymore. That could have been any county. They could, in fact, right before one of the rounds of one of the smaller counties said the Board of Supervisors was complaining, saying they weren't going to convert. And so what we actually had to do was a lot of contingency planning around what happens if they actually, who holds the cards if a county says we're not going, and it turned out, if you went through the analysis, I think it turned out that the state held the cards, because what happens to all of the clients in that county? They don't get nothing. Money doesn't flow. Where do they go? They go to their local child support department or their local board of supervisors. What the hell's going on? I'm not getting any of my payments. And I think it's pretty quick to say, the board's going to say, oh, we've got to make the payments flow. Well, you want to make the payments flow, you got to convert your system. So I think that to some degree, the way it was structured there, that it's not in every program that's going to work that way. Now, programmatically, when the State Department was established in 2000, it gave the director through the State Department a lot of power over local program performance and system cooperation. So if the local program director decided that they didn't want to cooperate, I actually, as director, had the ability to take over the local operation and do it myself. And so that was the ultimate threat. Never had to do that. We had a couple of counties who were under sanction because of their poor performance. And we took measures to try to improve that performance. And in fact, in many cases, in all cases, those counties turned around their performance. Stephen Golightly, sitting behind you, is one of the people that I was very happy to go down to the Board of Supervisors and praise him for actually getting out of the penalty for LA because of the good work that they had done there.
And I don't want to cut us off. I'm getting the signal from behind. I hope that you guys got something out of today, and feel free to hang around and talk to my brothers David up here if you have a few additional questions that you want to ask them. Hopefully you got something out of today, and I think a lot of what we've heard, yes, it applies to projects that impact state and local levels, but to any IT projects, right? If you're crossing organizations, crossing even divisions within an organization, some of these concepts I think apply. So thank you to our panelists for being here today. And thank all of you for being here, and feel free to come up and ask whatever questions you have if you can catch them. Thank you guys.